Hey expats and travelers, welcome back as we break down Portugal versus France. As we know, many of you are interested in moving to Portugal and now looking at other places in Europe that might fit the bill for you. I'm Josh with Expats Everywhere.
And I'm Kalie. Number one is cost of living, a big one.
Yep, cost of living is definitely a big one, and this one is going to be a strange one or an interesting one because it really gets thrown off by the cost of accommodations right now in Portugal having risen so much. So in general, what we look at is France is more expensive on consumer goods, going out to eat, getting stuff like groceries in.
Alcohol, yeah, all of it really. If you think about your daily life, the money that you spend, you know, your utilities and such, it's all higher. It's the accommodation that is kind of the wild card right now, but it's kind of just right now, right? I mean, it hasn't, like historically, it's probably not been Portugal higher than...
Well, historically, it's very much been in Portugal's favor, but we're not living in history, we're living in the present. And right now at present, we're talking about levels basically where you have the cost of an apartment in downtown Lisbon versus downtown Paris is about the same for a one bedroom.
Is it really?
It is, it is.
That's
Now,
crazy.
it changes when you start to get bigger and you're looking at maybe like a 3-bedroom place. Paris is the more expensive option. But if you're a singular couple looking for just a 1-bedroom place, then it's gonna kind of be a wash.
Yeah, which is really crazy. So thinking about capital cities, Lisbon and Paris, prices are still cheaper in Lisbon, except for accommodation, depending on that. Now, what about if we talk about second cities, like Porto and Marseille, let's say? What's the comparison there?
Yep, Porto and Marseille, we're actually looking at something astonishing, it's shocking. It's 40% higher in Porto versus Marseille.
Just accommodations, though.
Accommodations.
Yeah, this is the crazy one. So overall, when we talk about the country, mainly Portugal has a better cost of living, a lower cost of living. Right now, it's just the wild card, like I said, is the accommodation.
It's the accommodation, and we have to also think about what this means for the local economy and earning. So if you're earning on the local economy in France versus Portugal, France is going to be much better. You're going to earn a lot more money in France compared to Portugal, which is, I think, really what is reflected in maybe the consumer goods. Housing's just gotten out of control. All right, but if we don't really factor in jobs, because a lot of people are bringing jobs into the country, they're not taking jobs from the local market, then you're bringing a job from Canada, UK, US, and that income level, your money is gonna go further in Portugal. So for that reason, the winner is Portugal.
Number two is safety. I think this is a pretty straightforward one when we think about the different rankings, global rankings, peace index, that stuff.
Yeah, well, it's definitely one that has a screaming winner. So we'll just cut to the chase, and the winner is Portugal. And here's why. Because France is the worst in terms of safety in Europe.
Yeah, that's crazy. That's a crazy stat. I think a lot of people don't think that through.
Bonkers.
Yeah.
Bonkers. Mm-hmm. Look, France has, compared to Portugal, France has a much higher terrorist threat. I think we've seen that over the years. I think that's why their global peace index has dropped comparatively. There just seems to be more unrest. There's more protests. There's more of that type of stuff. Not to mention other types of
petty crime and such. I mean, just lower level all the way up to higher level. So overall, it's just higher than Portugal is.
Yeah, Portugal in terms of in Europe is in the top third of safest places to be, whereas France is dead last. So the winner is Portugal. Now moving on to food, this one is always contentious because food is such a subjective thing and we're trying to be objective in this type of video. So let's take a look at something like Food Atlas and then also share our own opinions. Maybe let's start with our own opinions and then we'll drop the bomb on Food Atlas.
Okay. I think this one is difficult because the food's quite different, I would say.
Very.
I feel like the Portuguese traditional dishes are a little heartier, starchier maybe, whereas French are a little lighter. They do have, no?
Well, I think, no, I made that face because France is large. And France has a lot of regional cuisines, and the different regions have different types of way of preparing. Not to say that Portugal doesn't. Absolutely, that exists in Portugal. But to say that French food is lighter, I don't know.
Maybe it depends on where you are in France, right? I mean, because if you're in a cooler region, then you might find some of the heavier dishes.
Yeah.
That's true. But I think overall, Portugal has the heavier dishes in the different regions. I mean,
Okay.
you have your lighter dishes, like lighter like seafood, but generally it's still paired with French fries or some sort of potato or rice or something.
Yeah, well, I mean, maybe you're from Oregon or Canada or something, and you like heartier foods. And you're like
I know,
hearty
potatoes.
stock. When I say Oregon, I mean like you're a lumberjack. No, so it's a type of distinction that we're trying to make and separate the two based on observations that we've made, right?
Right.
I think one observation that I've made is vegetable dishes are more plentiful in France. So if you're into eating a lot of vegetables or you're vegetarian, then I think France will give you better options for that.
Okay.
Yeah?
Yeah, I
now,
agree with that.
Food Atlas. Food Atlas has done a ranking of the best foods in 2023, 2024, and actually Portugal finished 4th, France finished 8th. Now, this is interesting to me because France is by far the more famous cuisine.
Popular, global, right?
Famous cuisine. No, because if you're looking at popularity, popularity would say that Food Atlas.
Well, Food Atlas is saying that it's Portugal, but like more people, I think, have outside of Europe, let's say, have tried French food over Portuguese food.
Famous. Yeah, that's what fame is, right? Like more people know about it.
Yeah.
Now, whether people like it or not, that to me is popularity.
Okay.
Do
So
you
you're
see-
saying, yeah, so people are saying that Portuguese food is more popular than French food in this article.
Yeah, people are more favorable to Portuguese food than French food. That's
Okay.
why it's number 4 versus number 8. Now, it could be a flood of Portuguese people that have just gone in there and voted for their own thing.
Which happens,
It
yeah.
literally could be that. Because we're Arsenal fans, and that happens with polls in the Premier League all the time. Arsenal just hijacks the polls. The fans
do they?
get-
All the fans go and
yeah,
vote?
it's crazy.
I guess
But
that's how polling could work.
yeah, but for me, I'm not a huge fan of French food, so it was almost like confirmation bias when I saw that Portugal was 4th and French was 8th.
I still think that French is the winner, though.
Do you?
Yeah.
Well, the people have spoken.
Who is the people?
The people on Food Atlas.
Yeah, what? I mean, I would say France.
What
but-
do you like about French food? Like
I don't know. I guess
what
maybe
are your
the
favorite dishes?
variety. I do like crepes. That would be one thing. Their pastries are good, different. I can't believe you. Generally, Josh likes the French croissant better than the Portuguese
That's
one.
true. That's true.
So, I mean, they are very different.
But I'll take a pastel de nata over a crepe any day of the week.
I don't know. I think just fresher, like you were saying, with the vegetables, having those types of dishes for French food is a little nicer than the heartier, stockier ones of the French fries and the rice and potatoes of Portuguese.
Okay, so we split on this. Is this one going to be a tie?
I guess so.
The winner is
France.
tie. The winner is
France.
Portugal. All right, so moving on to the variety of cities and towns that both countries offer, because whenever you move to a place, you want to be able to have variety of places to visit, interesting things to see. This is where it could get interesting because France is so much stinking bigger.
Yes, has a lot more variety, right? From the north to the center part to the south, which obviously Portugal has a north, center, and south as well, but France is just so much bigger. So it offers a lot of variety, bigger cities, bigger towns compared to Portugal. France has more going on, I think. It's just more developed in that sense, right?
Yeah, more developed. It has I don't want to bring in history into this because this is going to come up in the culture section, but there is an influence, let's say, of historical influence in the variety of cities that you've got in France. You do have that in Portugal, absolutely. But what I'm getting at is like you have population densities which are larger, so there's more secondary and tertiary cities in France compared to Portugal. So this could give you more options to live, definitely more options of places to visit, with more to do in those places.
Yeah, I think it's pretty straightforward.
Straightforward.
The winner?
The winner is France. Now moving on to language. Language, we're gonna get a little bit analytical, but we'll also share you our opinion as well. The analytics say that, and we actually need to look at this from 2 different points of view. We need to look at it from how easy is it for English speakers to learn that new language, that target language, which is Portuguese and French, and how easy is it to communicate with the local population in English? So how is their English fluency? I think this is where we have a clear winner. So what do you think about French as a language?
Well, I have no idea how to speak French.
Okay.
Merci, I think is what I can
Yeah.
say. It seems really
Bonjour.
difficult. Yeah, oh yeah, bonjour, yeah, I could do that one too. Au revoir.
Au revoir. Yeah.
But
Kalie has just told you all the French that she knows.
Yes. It sounds like a difficult language, honestly. Structurally, I'm not sure. I've never sat down and looked at, like, where's the subject, where's the verb. I don't know the structure part of it, so I don't know how easy it is to learn in that sense. But when listening to it, I guess maybe because I don't know much, there's not much that I pick up. I can pick up it's French when I hear someone speaking, but that's all I know.
Oh, they're French.
Yeah.
So here's what I'll say. I have heard this many, many times from people just like you that said that in high school I studied French, so I feel more comfortable operating in France versus trying to learn a new language in Portuguese. I get that.
Valid.
I definitely get that. To have some sort of French background and then go into France with that as your base, then to learn the language better, totally understand. If all things are equal though, and you're starting from zero with both languages, both analytically are in the top 9 languages for English people to learn.
Like the easiest?
Easiest. I personally think that Portuguese is easier to learn in terms of hearing all of the sounds, even though Portuguese is known for
not
saying all the sounds,
Yeah.
but actually it is quite a phonetic language when you get down to it, whereas I don't think French is. I think there are a lot of silent letters in French that you don't have in Portuguese.
Now, what about speaking French to a French person in France versus speaking Portuguese to a Portuguese person in Portugal? Which one is easier?
Anecdotally, we can tell you that it is much easier to talk to people in Portugal versus in France. It is much easier to get on with the Portuguese people. There's more patience there. French people, mainly Parisians, because we actually didn't experience this in the South. The South was better in this regard, warmer, more patient, but Parisians are quite rough.
Yeah, sometimes, we've known people who have tried speaking French, who French is not their first language, and they've been told by a French person, just stop. You're butchering the language. I don't even want to hear it.
Yeah.
Which can be disheartening if you're trying to learn the language and you're actually trying. Whereas here in Portugal, they find it very nice that you're trying and they want to work with you. Yeah, they're very happy that you're trying to learn the language. So when it comes to that, I think there's a clear winner. So it's
well, and then we also need to look at how are both countries' levels in English, okay? And because English is the second language of the world, really. It's definitely the tourist world's language. If you're gonna know a second language, it's gonna be English to be the most useful. And Portugal is by far and away the winner. Portugal is in the top tier of countries that have English proficiency, and France is in like the middle tier. So they're moderately proficient versus very highly proficient in Portuguese. Among Portuguese.
Among the Portuguese. Okay, so breaking down those 3 topics, seems like there's a clear winner here.
Clear winner.
And it is
Portugal. All right, moving on to culture. We have now divided culture and society because culture, we're going to talk more about history and art and influence of the world. Society is going to be more about like what's happening present day, what are the customs, how does that fit with maybe a North American vibe, because most of our audience is North American. We're North American, so we kind of come at things from that perspective. Culture, art, history, influence on the world. What do you think?
Well, I think overall France has a lot, but you can't forget that Portuguese were explorers. So they have a lot of history there. They have a lot of imprint, I guess, on different parts of the world because of their exploration. So that's huge. So outside of Portugal, I think that Portugal has done a lot, right, in those different countries around the world.
Yeah, I don't want to minimize Portugal's influence in the world, but to try to compare Portugal and France isn't very fair. I think we would be clutching at straws. I think just below Italy, in terms of what they've done for Western civilization at least, is France.
Yeah. Oh, of course, their art, their architecture, their influence, definitely. But I just wanted to highlight that Portugal does have exploration as a big one. So it's not like there's nothing. I think sometimes it gets lost in the culture aspect that Portugal has the exploration. But overall, there is a clear winner here on more, right?
Yeah. Now, if you're a history buff and you're hoping to get some sort of historical value out of either country that you move to, you're going to be able to do that. I think you're going to be more familiar with the history that you find in France just because of what our history books are like, but there is a ton of deep historical value here in Portugal to explore. However, the winner is France.
Next, we're going on to society, which is a little different than culture. And like Josh said, in the past, we put those together, but we're going to separate them. So culture is a bit more of the historical aspect and the imprint on the world. Society is kind of nowadays.
Yeah. Now, earlier I mentioned Parisian versus the south of France, and there is definitely a difference in the societies there, the way people interact with you. I find that the south is actually quite nice. It's quite chill. We've been to Marseille, we've been to Cannes, we've been to Nice, and all of those cities there in the south have been really nice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the people there have been a lot easier to talk to, a bit chiller of a vibe. So definitely nicer than in Paris, where the Parisians, I guess, have a stereotype of being a bit rough, unpleasant, unkind. So you might have a different experience. France is big, right? And then, of course, you have all different experiences in between, right? If you're thinking about the different, Lyon and Bordeaux and such. So
Bordeaux is also really nice.
Yeah.
Like the people were nice, patient, easy to get on with.
So mainly it's just Parisians.
It's Parisians, yeah. Parisians get a bad rap, and they deserve it. They earn it.
They uphold it, for sure.
Yeah.
So there's that, and then in Portugal?
Yeah, in Portugal, I think people in the north are notoriously warm. People in Alentejo as well. There's just not as many, let's say, foreigners that go to Alentejo to live. I would say the south of Portugal, which is Algarve, the people are a little more transactional in their dealings with foreigners.
Just kind of because it's a touristy,
heavily,
in the summers it's quite touristy, right?
Yeah, it's heavily bombarded with tourism. I think there's a mixed bag for a capital city. There's a mixed bag in Lisbon. Sometimes you meet some really, really nice people. Other people, it's more transactional. It's more like that kind of city mentality, fast-paced, hurry.
Yeah, which is actually pretty good for a capital city in a European country, European country, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So as far as that goes, you still have a bit more warmth in it for a capital city compared to other capital cities, right?
Yeah, I would say if we're looking at this kind of over the whole and generalizing, Portuguese people are nicer, warmer. I also think that cultural norms for North Americans, you're probably not going to stand out as badly in Portugal versus France.
I agree. Mm-hmm.
Like you're going to be able to blend in just being yourself.
I agree.
Yeah?
So for that, the winner is
Portugal. All right, moving on to healthcare. Now, healthcare is one that we had to dig into. We had to look at several surveys. All of the surveys rankings really kicked back the same result. So spoiler alert, the rankings said that France was better. Right?
So let's go right into it. The winner is?
Yeah.
No.
Go ahead.
France is better. Although Portugal does have top of the line care with the hospitals, the doctors, the clinics and such, I think you can't really compare Portugal and France here.
Yeah, I mean, you do say that Portugal has top of the line care, which is true, but it's not top of the line care like absolutely everywhere.
Right.
So depending on where you live, you might have some fantastic care, but if you live in a smaller, more rural area, then you might have to travel to get that top of the line care.
Which I think it's like that in a lot of places. I mean, if you're in a remote village in France, then you're probably the same. But maybe you have something that's a little closer than a remote village in Portugal. So
yeah, if you're in a small town in the U.S.
Right. Yeah.
So,
then maybe you have to travel a little bit. But you can get to something better, faster, maybe in France than compared to Portugal.
Yeah. I mean, there is a chasm between the two in terms of the ranking, where France is significantly better and making a lot of strides.
Yeah, which makes sense.
I do think that a lot of their tax dollars do go into healthcare. So,
right. Which we'll get to that because high taxes, right? But we'll get to taxes.
All right. So the winner of healthcare is France. Let's move on to infrastructure. So what is the infrastructure like in both countries?
Yeah, I think, again, this is an easy one. France is just so much bigger and has been developing for so much longer, I would say. Portugal, while it does have good infrastructure in the cities and some of the towns, not everywhere it does have great infrastructure. So France just has been doing it a bit longer, I think, and Portugal has some ways to catch up. What do you think?
Yeah, I think this category oftentimes comes down to GDP, like whose GDP is bigger, who has more money to spend on infrastructure. Like you said, France has just been doing it for longer, right? So their infrastructure is much more built up, much more economically powerful. They have some of the best roads in Europe. They have more major airports. So if you're trying to get out and about, you don't have to live in Paris. You can live somewhere else. And you'll still have access to a great airport. Whereas here, it's like you basically have three, right? You have Porto in the north, you have Lisbon, which is in the middle of the country, and then you also have Faro, which is in the south. And Faro connects with quite a few flights through EasyJet or Ryanair. And let's not forget the two islands that Portugal has.
Yes.
There's airports there, but that's only covering a small demographic of people who are living there.
Right. Whereas France just has major airports that major airlines go through all the time, right?
Yeah.
So that's, for airports and
connectivity back to the U.S. Certainly going through Charles de Gaulle in Paris. You can get direct flights from Lisbon. Maybe there's one or two from Porto.
More are popping up for sure.
Yeah.
But still, overall infrastructure, the winner is
France. All right, next this moves us on to an extremely important topic, especially when you're talking about where to live next, and that is the quality of life.
Both of them have wine, so I'm happy with both. Although I guess it's cheaper in Portugal. That might go back to the cost of living. Quality of life. I think both offer great quality of life. I think that there are some spots in France that are probably really nice that are a bit more, not remote, but out in the open air that maybe you get fresher air. Compared to some of the cities along the coast in Portugal and stuff, which you get the seawater and, that fresh air. But I think that overall you might get some of the more mountainous regions in France and you get that fresh air.
Yeah, I think that you could get the same here in Portugal if you want. Yeah, I do understand what you mean, but I actually think that overall, in terms of looking at the whole country of France, they have problems with air quality.
Pollution.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe due to heavier levels of manufacturing.
Yeah, and maybe if there are some valleys, that always holds stuff in, right? We talked about that when we did our Portugal versus Italy. There are some parts in the north that have bad pollution because of factories and then holding it in. Whereas the good thing about Portugal is because you're along the coast and so much of it is along the coast, you get that natural breeze. So there is that.
Yep, and Portugal, you know how I am, I like to get analytical. I went ahead and I looked at the quality of life indexes between the two, and Portugal has a higher quality of life index. And where they fall short is they have poor scores in purchasing power index and the property price to income ratio.
Yes, well, and those are two things we've already actually talked about, right? With the GDP and then the cost of living with accommodations. But I think overall happiness, right? There's a lot to consider and what makes you happy, right? So there's a lot to consider as to what makes you happy and what quality of life is important for you. But making money is a big thing. So if you're not making as much money, you don't have as much purchasing power, whether it's in your own country or being able to travel abroad. That's one thing, right? France does, has more money there. And then accommodations right now has just been really difficult too.
Yeah, let me share this. So France has 8 points lower than Portugal on that index. And interestingly enough, where Portugal has 2 that they rank poorly in that bring their score down, France doesn't have any that are rated poorly, but they have several that are rated at moderate.
Okay, so consistent.
Yeah, so the ones that are moderate, they have moderate scores in safety. They have moderate scores in cost of living. They also have a moderate score in property price to income ratio.
Okay.
And then the pollution index.
Oh, okay.
Right?
So pollution. Yeah.
So if things like purchasing power index and property price to income ratio, which are considered to be on the local economy, if you're bringing in, let's say, foreign earned income and not making money in the local economy, both of those things don't matter to you. They don't affect you.
True.
You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, exactly.
So while Portugal ranks poorly in those, they literally don't matter when you are bringing in foreign earned income.
Right. So that would just kind of be a wipe. But then you have stuff like safety, which no matter where you are in France or in Portugal, safety is going to be something that you have to think about.
Correct.
And Portugal is higher for safety, higher for things like cost of living, pollution, depending on what part of the country
where
you're
you
in.
are, yeah.
Yeah. So overall happiness, though, it's a clear winner, right?
Yeah, this isn't a happiness index, but this is this is quality of life index.
But they take happiness into consideration.
They do. The winner is Portugal. All right, moving on to a topic that is very important to a lot of you, and that is climate and weather. We finally found a site that helps us look and compare more analytically at both of these. What did you find, Kaylee?
Okay, what I did like is that you can compare the whole country as opposed to different cities because, you know, countries are big and different. So you can compare the whole country. So we compare France and Portugal. Something that actually really surprised me on this site is that there are more rain days and more rain in France.
That didn't surprise me.
That surprised me.
Yeah.
Well, everyone always talks about how, especially up in the north in Portugal, it's so rainy, but comparatively speaking, it's not, that rainy. So you have more rain days, more precipitation that happens in France. Overall, during like daylight hours, that's a big one.
Yes.
Daylight hours. So
yes.
When you hit the summertime, France has a little lighter on the bookends.
Yes.
But in the winter, there's a big difference. So you'll get more daylight. Yeah, you'll get more daylight in Portugal in the winter compared to France. So personally, I think that's more important. I don't need that extra maybe 30 minutes, an hour in the summer because we already get such a long day. Last night, Josh was saying, I can't believe it's still bright outside when it was late. So we already get good, long, sunny days in the summer. So I'd rather have just a little longer in the winter, right?
Yeah, so look, sunny days are really important. Rainy days to count are also really important in terms of like how you're feeling, what your mood's like. At least it's that way for me. Anecdotally, what I will say is that we spent a winter, 2 winters ago in southern France and had phenomenal weather.
Yes.
It was almost like, this is much better than Porto.
True. But it might have been more comparable to Algarve, right? Depending on where you are in the country.
100%, that's what I was gonna say. So like I actually looked into what the weather patterns were like for southern France, and southern France is definitely better than north of Portugal.
Yes.
So
right. So depending on where you live.
It's there on the Mediterranean, whereas north of Portugal, you're getting battered sometimes by these storm systems coming off the Atlantic. But overall, comparing the 2 countries as a whole, there is a winner, and that winner is named Portugal. All right, moving on to taxes, something that is very near and dear to everyone's heart and a favorite topic of nearly everybody we talk to, taxes. And there is a clear winner with taxes compared to some of the other comparisons that we've made between Portugal and Spain or Italy. So, what do you want to say about taxes?
I just think that generally Europe is known to have high taxes, a high percentage because of what they use them towards, maybe something like healthcare or the infrastructure. So just be prepared that a lot of places in Europe have high taxes.
Yes. The first roughly 11,000 euros that you make in income in France is going to be taxed at 0. And then above that 11,000 mark, then you're in the 11% tax bracket. And the cool thing is that once you get to the highest point in the Portuguese tax bracket, if you're making that income in France, you're only looking at around 30% taxes.
As opposed to 48%.
Whereas it's 48 in Portugal, right?
Which is a big jump.
It's a huge jump. Now, France's top tax rate is at 45%, but this is on a really high level above the threshold of 177,000 euros.
Yeah, that's much higher.
So it's like whatever is above that 177 is being taxed at 45%.
Right. Whereas you don't have to get too high to get into the 48% of Portugal.
Right. So the other thing is that for pensioners have a more favorable tax rate compared to in Portugal. Portugal, you're basically just taxing the progressive scale now. In the past, you had something called NHR, and those that still have NHR will find favor in it. At one point, I think it was 0. Then it became 10%,
right,
which is pretty similar to what France is offering. But France isn't offering it as a special tax regime. It's just the way they do their taxes. Yeah. So I think for those reasons, there's a clear winner, although there are some other nuances that you might need to look at, like inheritance tax. But in general, we're just looking at income tax here. Clear winner is France. All right, let's total it up. I'm actually really surprised because I thought Portugal would be a runaway winner, but it was much tighter. However, the winner is Portugal.
And if you want to see us compare Portugal and Spain and then Portugal and Italy, then check out these 2 videos right here. Now, let's get moving.
Bye.